Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 17, The Current Puppy Boom. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. I can't believe that this is already episode 17, and we thought what better to talk about right now than the current puppy boom. So, before we get into this, my name is Mariano, that's Brent. We want to thank you guys so much for listening. I mean, this podcast has still been growing just at an immense rate. It's like tumbling over itself faster and faster. You can find us on Instagram, me at UNTAMEDDOGCO, that's UNTAMEDDOGCO, all one word. You can find Brent at CANISBEHAVIor, CANIS behavior. Again, all one word. Now, what we mean by the current puppy boom is with this whole thing, we've already talked a lot about COVID-19, so we're not really going to touch on it too much. But the thing is, during this time, and a lot of the lockdown stuff is still happening, even though it's kind of on its way out in places. I'm in Arizona and Brent's in California, and both places are kind of like phasing things back to normality. But a lot of people got dogs during this time, like a lot of people. And we wanted to talk about why that is. And, more specifically, what are some good tips and tricks that you guys can utilize to help you raise your puppies now and in the future? So with that being said, let's dive right in. How are you, man?
I'm good, man. How you been?
Pretty good.
It's been a week. A lot of things have happened. It's so funny. I found out a couple days ago because, with lockdown and just things being the way that they are, and also this being a very busy training season for most dog trainers, I just found out a few days ago we were in June. It's crazy. It's crazy. I was like, it's June 4th already.
I'm not lying to you. I had that exact same thought the day before yesterday. No joke.
Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy how that happens?
Because I got the truck, and so I had to do the insurance on it, and I was like, wow, it's already June? Jeez, okay.
We are halfway through 2020, guys. This is nuts. But anyways, let's get back on subject. So as Mariano was saying, there's a huge puppy boom, right? Literally, we get calls every single day, at least 3 to 5 calls every single day about brand new puppies, puppy questions. There are some people that were early to get the puppies, but we're starting to see even now 3 months later into COVID-19, we see people getting puppies now for the first time, 8 weeks old, 9 weeks old, 10 weeks old. So there's a huge boom in the growth of puppies. And as dog trainers, one of the big things that we are huge advocates for is preventative dog training, right? Pretty much if we can raise dogs the right way from the get-go, now we can lower the number of the amount of dogs going into shelters in adolescence. Now we can make sure that people adapt and grow very well with their animals in the house. And you know what? There's so many first-time puppy owners that we're seeing, young millennials who are either coupled up or just realize that it's the first time that they actually want to get a dog, as adults. And so we're starting to see a lot of first-time questions. We're starting to see, maybe I had a dog when I was younger, but now I don't. Now I'm getting a dog first time as an adult. Some of these people are off of work. Some of these people are still working just from home. So there's just a whole variety of different things and questions that we're getting. And so in today's podcast, we really just want to cover some of the things that we're seeing that we feel really need to be advised and addressed for the public. Because those of you guys who have a puppy and have opened your homes up to new members of the family, doing it right the first time is going to save you a lot of headaches, a lot of sadness, and a lot of money in the long term. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of stress from the puppy's perspective.
Yeah. So if we can raise our puppies really, really well from the get-go, we'll be able to have a long lasting relationship with our dogs. And as dog trainers, that's literally the only thing we care about, right? We want our dogs and our humans to stay together as long as possible. So let's go ahead and kind of just dive into our first prompt. So as we mentioned, the biggest reason people got puppies is because for the first time in probably their adult lives or in a long time, we start saying we have time to raise a dog, right? We're actually home. We're actually able to be present. We all know in theory that puppies take a lot of work to raise. However, we want to make sure that you guys hone in that work in the right areas because there's a lot of common mistakes that we see coming up.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And I think it's funny too, because yes, I mean, everyone or most people had extra time at home. And I know that was a big factor in it because you and I have been talking to people like at dog parks or just clients and Just before we started recording this evening here, we were talking about, I got like 3 or 4 calls just yesterday all about puppies under like 16 weeks. And it just seems like people have time at home. And so they figure, hey, I mean, it just worked out, which is great. But also there was, I know we talked about this in the past a little bit because of COVID and people having to kind of make space from each other and trying to clean up, and like, what's the word? Like be as efficient as possible with stuff. Shelters had to clear out, rescues had to clear out. So they had to find like real quick, either temporary or permanent situations for puppies and older dogs. So a lot of people took on puppies. A lot of them took them on as like temporary fosters. A lot of them just straight up adopted them. And a lot of them started as one and kind of moved to the other as they realized, like, I just love this dog. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a funny time. I mean, summer is typically a busy season for dog training in general, at least in North America. I mean, it might be different elsewhere where like the seasons are different, but yeah, it's been a funny one. It didn't quite work out exactly how we thought, but I guess nothing really did.
Right. Nothing really did. But we're seeing a lot of good also come from this as well. So we have these new passionate dog owners, and I think the big thing we want to talk about just straight off the bat, let's go ahead and just talk about, as dog trainers, some of the common errors or mistakes that we see people make in puppy raising. So if those of you who are listening or you guys know someone who just got a puppy, please send them this episode of the podcast because I think it's going to be highly educational for people. And it's crazy. It's dog training has a lot of stages to it. And I would say puppy raising is one of the most important stages of dog training, dog raising, whatever you want to call it. So let's go ahead and just jump into some of the things we see people doing wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And before we do, I just want to, if you're going to send this episode to someone who just got a puppy, not to shameless plug, but I think that the Deeper Look series, we did like 5 or 6 episodes that we titled Deeper Look into different things. And there's a few in there that I think would be absolutely hugely beneficial for someone who got a puppy. Stuff like the socialization one, the pure positive reinforcement one, the balance training one. There's just so many aspects of that I want to make sure that, it's our job. We started this podcast because we just wanted to give people as much useful information as possible. So just keep that in your head if you're planning on sending this out, which we appreciate, by the way. Consider those as well. They'll help.
Right.
So what people do wrong. I'm going to start with lack of boundaries. And, it's funny. Brent and I were talking the other day. We really love the amount of support we get from this, and we take this super serious. And we were listening back to our episode about structure and like why that episode does really well I mean, all of them have been doing well, but this one has like really been kind of just outperforming a ton of the others. And we thought it was because the reason why we chose to do structure was because structure is a word that's so like vague. And so people are like, I hear what you're saying, and I hear every dog trainer on YouTube saying that, but like, what does that mean? How do I do structure? And boundaries, I think, is another one of those. And it's one of those where they're like, okay, well, like boundaries, like how? I mean, they're not like kids, or that's what everybody tells me, or whatever the case. So people tend to lack boundaries, and we're going to dive into that more as we get into some proper puppy raising tips and techniques and things like that. But lack of boundaries, I feel like is almost a blanket that can encompass most, if not all, of the other things that people do wrong. And I'll let you touch on some too. I just wanted to throw that out there, and then I'll get off my soapbox here.
Yeah. So yeah, lack of boundaries or like just giving the dog too much freedom in general. This is, I think, probably the number one mistake new puppy owners create. Right. A lot of times what I see is there are people, let's say you're a first time dog owner. If you're a first time dog owner, a lot of times we kind of relate to having dogs when we were kids, right? Or you're a first-time dog owner in general, right? You've never owned an animal before or kept them as a pet before. So there's a learning curve there. However, if we did have animals when we were smaller, like when we were children, a lot of times our experience is, my dog, had full reign of the house, or my dog lived in the backyard, or my dog could run around wherever he wanted. And so sometimes this kind of primes our brains and plants a seed into our heads that this is what dogs need. Dogs need freedom. Right. And so many times I'll hear from people that they go, I wouldn't dare get a dog until I have a house with a yard. Right. And they said that when they were 21, and now they're 33 and they still don't have a house with a yard. So they therefore don't have a dog. But the funny thing is during COVID, those same people decided to get a dog. So that's the interesting part. So a lot of times our minds are primed to think that dogs require freedom. Now, I would say dogs totally require exercise. They do require stimulation. They do require room to move, but there's many ways to supplement this. walks and exercises at a park, dog parks, daycares, all that type of stuff. However, a lot of times with very small puppies, and again, we're talking under 16 weeks of age, people just give the dog a lot of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And unfortunately, what a lot of freedom usually leads to, it leads to potential problems and expectations and the development of bad behaviors that people have to spend a lot of money on later to fix or reverse or just manage. Right. A couple of those things would be, and then I'll go ahead and hand this over to you. Like, we see that puppies develop very undesirable expectations from owners when they have a lot of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So some expectations would be like, I always want you to be around to play with me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So many times I get calls from people that they say, oh my gosh, my puppy is biting me all the time. So that automatically puts a light bulb in my head. And it's like, biting you all the time? Oh, so if all the time he's biting you, that means all the time he has access to you. Right. That's kind of the correlation. Right. So my follow-up question is, where does your dog hang out all day? And 99.9% of the time, the answer is, my dog just kind of follows me everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so what this does is, when the dog has a lot of freedom, unfortunately, you become your dog's favorite plaything. And this is going to lead to biting you, chasing you, nipping at you. It's going to lead to all of these very, I guess what I would consider to be very childish, annoying behaviors, because you are your dog's favorite thing. Right. Which on an emotional level, there's nothing wrong with that. But on a behavioral level, your dog doesn't learn how to play with anything else or develop any other hobbies or habits. And this obsession with you as their owner is sweet, but at the same time, not healthy for puppy development.
Yeah, well, I tell people all the time that the puppy, like the context of everything is perfectly fine. He's not being aggressive if he's nipping at you, but it's still inappropriate. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of the big difference, because kids can do things meaning well, but it doesn't make it the right thing to do. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that the interesting thing about developing these false expectations, even kind of on like an emotional level from the puppy's perspective, it hinders them a little bit when they think of you as like this object that they have constant access to, because then that kind of hinders other aspects of training that are huge, like socializing. How do you socialize, or how do you, like, let's say, desensitize a puppy to something that they're nervous about, and maybe rightfully so, like the loud ass garbage truck, or or something
Mm-hmm.
like that, when they're not confident that you're someone who can kind of keep them safe and keep them, like,
Mm-hmm.
hold them to a very clear understanding of what things should be. You're just kind of that plaything. And two, when a puppy has not constant access, but just doesn't know how to behave with you, they are never given the opportunity to kind of think of themselves as another variable in any equation. They're just kind of like, oh, I see another dog off leash. I would hate this all the time in LA. Like, I'd go, because I used to live in LA too. So like,
Mm-hmm.
Runyon Canyon was horrible with this. I'd be walking my dogs on leashes. People's dogs would be like 40 yards ahead of them, bolting into my dogs' faces, and my dogs aren't always super friendly. And they're waving at me, oh, it's okay, he's friendly. I'm like, yeah, they're not. And like,
Yeah.
and dogs, puppies, I mean, what do you expect? They don't know any better, and it's hard to blame the dog, even if they're older. But a puppy especially, it's good to teach them that, like, yeah, it's great to play, it's great to socialize, but always keep in mind there's more to the equation than just, do I want to do this right now? It's like, well, does mom want to play with me back, or am I
Mm-hmm.
being a nuisance?
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge thing that I notice in puppies.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, and our job is to kind of just put the dog in the right situation so that habit doesn't get out of hand, right? We
Right.
want to play with dogs, but here's the thing, is we have to play with dogs when we have complete attention on dogs, right? Too much freedom usually leads to a lot of demanding of attention, right? Where the dog will literally interrupt you anytime that you're not paying much attention to them, in the middle of a work meeting, a Zoom call, a telephone call while you're cooking. So just simply, again, too much freedom opens up a lot of doors. Also, what too much freedom does, it opens up a lot of doors for the dog to develop other bad behaviors, like chewing your shoes or destroying your couch or pooping and peeing in the wrong part of the house, developing an obsession with your underwear, right? Which is, so, I know it sounds gross, but like, so many calls I get, several calls a year of the puppy eating someone's underwear, and they have to take the dog to the vet to take that underwear out of their stomach, right? Things like that. But also what happens is, when you become your dog's number one, which I know in theory we want, right? We want the dog to think of us as number one, but we want him to think of us as number one in a slightly different way that we'll explain later. It also affects how our dogs socialize with the real world, right? So especially right now with COVID, right, where we're not really allowed to socialize or interact with many people. I can't explain to you how many puppy sessions I've done within the last month where I've walked into a house and the puppy, who should just be super excited to see a person, who should normally run up to me, kiss me, take treats from me. I can't explain to you how many puppies have ran away from me, barked at me, and it's taken me 5 to 10 minutes to get these dogs to warm up to me. Right. And it's even gotten to this point where I thought, maybe it's my mask. Maybe it's because I have a mask on when I'm going into these houses. So I asked the owners, I said, when I first meet your puppy, is it okay if I take my masks off? And the strange thing, it doesn't help. These dogs are not being socialized outside of their homes. They're not being socialized with the real world, right? Because we've kind of been taught the last couple months that we need to stay inside, right? So yeah, that's also a factor. But also, let's say we finally get to this point where, okay, your dog's ready, he's fully vaccinated, you want to take him out. You want to take him out to a dog park, for example. So many times I see dogs who cling to their owners as safety blankets because the codependency and the comfort with that owner is all that they know. Right. So that also becomes a hindrance in the dog socialization a little bit later. Right. What are some other things that you see that go wrong a little bit in puppy raising?
The big one for me is just people expect too much too soon. That's like the other side of the coin. It's either people just want to give their puppies every bit of freedom and everything in the world, not understanding that they need a parent.
Right.
They need freedom, of course. They need exercise and all the things that we've talked about, but they need guidance. That's our job as a dog owner. And I do notice, though, the other side of that is some people are like, I just got this, 4-month-old puppy for my daughter, and like he pees in the house. I tell him get off the couch, he doesn't listen. Blah 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 blah. He got out of the house the other day, ran away from me, and I'm like, have you taught him potty training or what no means or a recall? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, okay, well, let's work on that then. And people have these weird expectations, like, why isn't this dog just like perfect right now? And I'm like, well, it's a puppy. That's a big one, and I want to hear you touch on this one because I know this was kind of more, something that. More like something that you can put better than I can. It was like emotional raising versus principled raising.
Yeah. I think so. Sometimes I refer to this as dog culture, right? Ultimately, the more dogs you've owned, the more expectations you have for dogs that become members of your family, right? And since we're getting a lot of calls from people who maybe have no experience, or the only experience they have is that from when they were kids, we start seeing people lack dog culture. Right. And the reason I call it dog culture is because usually our cultures, it doesn't matter if you come from a Latin background or an Italian background or an African background, our cultures come preloaded already with expectations for their offspring. Right. So at what age you should be able to do what, how you should conduct yourself, how you should behave, how you should do X, Y, and Z. And, they have different protocols for when the child is a baby. They have different protocols when the child's 5 to 8 years old, and so different cultures, and we all grow up in different cultures. We have different expectations for our kids, but at least those cultures have very clear principles within them that help the parents guide and raise the child to whatever standard they feel is appropriate, right? And so when we have a culture established, we know what to do, when to do it, at what age the dog should be capable of it, or the kid. And so this kind of helps serve as guidelines for raising a puppy. But unfortunately, what we start seeing is we start seeing more of an emotional side to raising a dog, right? How the dog is feeling, in essence, dictates to the owner what they should be doing with the dog. So I've met owners, they're trying so hard to be good dog owners that, the dog is constantly energetic. So, the person who actually never took up running now takes up running just to try and tire their dog out, because that's what quote unquote good dog owners do. Or the dog that, is constantly chewing on stuff. They go out to the store and they buy him a bunch of chew toys because, they want to appease that behavior. Right. So there ends up becoming kind of this the dog's emotions, which unfortunately are ever changing through development, are telling the people what they should be doing with the dog versus the people guiding with principles what the dog should be doing at any given time, right? And so we go ahead. Sorry.
Well, yeah, no, I agree. I'm just what it ends up being like, as you say, that kind of what formulates in my head is people are like going after every whim that the dog has. It's almost as if the dog's raising them instead of vice versa, which shouldn't be the case. It's a puppy. It doesn't know what it wants.
Exactly. Just like children, they don't know what they want. Right. You know, unless it's a Capri Sun. I love Capri Suns.
Dude, I freeze them. Like as an adult, the way to eat a Capri Sun, everybody pay attention. So the way to eat a Capri Sun and not look like, like I'm 12 years old, which I don't care, but most, Brent gets mad at me because I ordered milk at a restaurant because I like milk, whatever.
Straight up ice cold milk.
Yeah, like straight milk. Who cares?
With dinner though. It's like,
so what?
Can I get a steak medium rare with milk?
My girlfriend does it with like espresso. I don't drink coffee. I'm like, all right, can I get some milk, please?
Yeah.
One time a girl was like, milk? And I was like, yeah, like milk. Like anyway, so the way to eat a Capri Sun as an adult is,
oh my God. Okay, go ahead.
You take it, put it in the freezer, and then once it's frozen solid, you cut the top off with some scissors and then eat it with a spoon, and it is just the best.
Yeah. That's the technique. For all of you Capri Sun connoisseurs, now you have it, the scoop. Let's get back to dogs.
Go ahead.
That was my digression. I apologize. I took it there. Where were we? I lost it.
Okay, here's where we were. So emotional puppy raising, the mistake is that you want to raise your dog because puppies don't always know what they want, or they know what they think they want, but they don't know what's good for them. And sometimes those things aren't the same.
Right. Okay. So back to that point. So emotional raising versus principled raising, we start seeing the dog's feelings start dictating to the owner what they should be doing at any given time. And unfortunately, this means that we have to sometimes adapt our whole life to fit those needs of the puppy, right? Because one thing that we all fear as dog owners is fucking this up, right? We don't want to do the wrong thing. We don't want to be a neglectful parent. We don't want to miss that opportunity. We don't want to, so what ends up happening is we either do too much, or sometimes what happens is people do nothing. Like they just don't try because they don't want to fuck it up, right? They hope that the dog might grow out of it, right? So many times I get bombarded with this mentality that, oh, but he's just a puppy. He's going to grow out of it, at 8 weeks. Okay. Yeah, it's true. And then I hear the same story with a different client. Oh, the dog's 4 months, the same behavior. Oh, he's only 4 months. I'm sure he's going to grow out of it. And I tell them, well, not necessarily. And then at 8 months, oh, but he's still a puppy. He's going to grow out of it. It's the exact same behavior, right? Yeah. And so what we start seeing is no, there are certain behaviors, guys, that puppies just do not grow out of. They just don't grow out of it unless you teach them or raise them with certain management systems, with certain tools, with certain intent. We have to have the right intent when training animals. And again, it's different from dog to dog. The way you might train a really lazy golden retriever versus the way you train raise a Belgian Malinois puppy for bite work. Like it's a very different process. Definitely different levels of energy are involved. But the idea is, we have to have those principles laid out for us. And I would say, not in defense of most dog owners, the internet kind of is helpful, but it also can overeducate. It can also, overstimulate people with knowledge where they don't know what the right thing to do is.
You know what? Right. Shout out to Brene Brown, because I think that a great way to put that would be the internet shines a light, but it can floodlight the hell out of you. Like there's so much information that it's like, okay, I watched it. I mean, the way that the internet typically goes, like from a dog owner's perspective, is people will click different dog trainers, probably start with the bigger, like more notable ones that they've heard of from other sources or whatever, kind of find the one that speaks the best, or the videos are cut and like edited in a way that they like the best, and then just kind of stick with that, which isn't necessarily bad, but there's so many others that when you start to like stray, then it's like, wait, but he said don't do this, and he said do this, and she said, so
right.
That's the issue with a lot of what's going on. And there's a lot of like top level dog trainers out there. We're just trying to do our part as best we can to this sort of end too. But there's a lot of people out there that are just trying to simplify that process and helping you understand this weird dichotomy of like, don't oversaturate yourself, but also all dogs are different, which is why we have to put out so much content to cover this like wide berth of everything. But definitely, I mean, hone in on something. And that's what we're going to talk about, coming up shortly here.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, and you've heard me say this before, things that you see on the internet are not wrong. They're just incomplete.
Mhm.
And they just don't take into account your situation, your schedule, your environment, and most importantly, they don't take into account your specific puppy's personality, right? I really wish there was videos on the internet that were like, for the dominant high drive puppy, for the lazy, sleepy puppy, for the, like tips for this type of puppy. So maybe that's something we'll work on in the future. Who knows?
The way you said that. Tips for this type of puppy.
Tips for this puppy, see? Anyways, so going back to just a couple of things. So emotional raising versus principled raising. People don't have a dog culture. So this is where dog trainers really have to come in and be specific, right? There's a lot of principles and guidelines that most dog trainers follow. However, how we achieve those things shift from puppy to puppy, owner to owner, right? Am I working with a family that has, 4 kids at home on summer break that can put some work in, or am I working with someone's housekeeper who's busy, keeping the house
Right.
up, and the family's non-existent, right? So all of these involve different strategies, different techniques, different realistic implementations of these techniques. That again, a real dog trainer, an in-person dog trainer, there is no video or artificial intelligence that can teach you guys this stuff. We need a real dog trainer in there to help find solutions for your specific situation. However, I will go ahead and say this. Anything you guys are trying, if you guys have tried it for more than a week and you're not seeing results, change your technique, change your approach, right? Or seek out help, because for some reason, either you're executing it wrong or the technique itself is not intended for the type of dog that you have or the type of puppy that you have, right? And we'll get more into that when we start talking about tips and stuff like that.
100%.
All right. Anything else we want to talk about, or what people do wrong, or that's pretty much what we covered? So they give too much freedom, or they expect too much, or they raise emotionally, versus principled, through principles, right?
Yeah.
So the end result of all this, guys, if we do these things wrong, we run a higher risk of our dogs having separation anxiety. We run a higher risk of our dogs developing behavioral problems later in life because they don't know. They don't know limits or boundaries, right? We run the risk of our dogs not learning how to deal with stress, right? This is something that's really important, right? It's so important in the early stages of puppyhood. We teach dogs, just like we teach children's, to deal with micro doses of stress, right? And if you guys really want to dive into that, check out our What is Structure in Dog Training video. I think it was episode 4 or 5.
4.
Yeah, check that out because we go into micro doses of stress in detail.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So anything else you want to talk about before we move on?
No, let's dive into some puppy raising tips and training techniques.
Beautiful. All right. You want to start? You want me to start? What you want?
I wanted you to start because I know that we were, as we were breaking this stuff down, you definitely have a really great way to kind of to separate and like explain the importance of routine building, and then I'll get into some other stuff after the fact.
Cool, man. All right. So we have a couple different checkpoints that we want to develop with puppies. And we're talking about the first 1 to 2 weeks of owning the puppy. So this is how I like to teach people. You have 1 week to develop 5 things. The first thing, make sure you start developing a potty training or a eating schedule. All right. We want to make sure our dogs eat meals at specific times so that we can do a bunch of different types of training, right? We can teach the dogs, oh, you eat your meals in your crate, or you eat your meals in your X pen, or you eat your meals at this time. So we can start developing an expectation, which helps develop a little bit of motivation for learning, right? So making sure our dogs are on strict meal schedules. So usually puppies under 4 months, they tend to get 3 meals a day. Now the trick is we need to make sure that these meals are proportionate to the dog's size, right? So many times, and again, this is a breeding technique versus a training technique, right? The very, very famous dean of dog training, Ian Dunbar, he is notorious for saying this. Make sure you get your veterinary information from your vet. Make sure you get your breeding information from your breeder, and make sure you get your dog training information from a dog trainer. Unfortunately, a lot of people are getting training information from their breeder. They're getting veterinary information from their dog trainer, and they're getting dog training advice from the store clerk at the pet store, right? So make sure that you guys are getting information from the people who are in the proper lanes, because we're specialists in our fields for one particular reason, because we're going to help you for the specific phase of life that you're in. I never give advice on health. I say, talk to your vet because I know better, right? Don't get me wrong. I know a lot about the veterinary field because I've been doing this long enough. However, if there's something that I don't know that's pretty detrimental, I'm not going to make executive decisions on it. I'm just going to give the advice that I know and say consult with a vet, right? However, vets don't really do that, and breeders don't really do that. So a breeder's technique is feed the puppies as much as they want to eat, right? Because from a breeder standpoint, they want to make sure the puppies are healthy, fat, and full, and that they're growing at a good rate. So that makes complete sense, right? As a breeder, right? Mm-hmm. From a dog training standpoint, if your dog is eating a bunch of food all day long, guess what that means? Any guesses? Any guesses? Free feeding. And this also means a lot of pooping all day long, right? So if your dog has a lot of poop accidents inside the house or in his crate or whatever it is, the very, very first thing we want to do is make sure that our dogs are eating the proper portions 3 times a day. Right? Do not overfeed your puppy, because if you overfeed your puppy, you can lower the food appetite. You can mess up the timing of potty training to make sure the dog's going in the right areas. So just keep that in mind. All right. Number 2 thing that we want to get done within the first week, we want to make sure that we're designating a potty area for the dog. Okay. Some of the common mistakes that I see is people will have potty pads all over their house. Literally, it's like the dog poops somewhere in the kitchen, they put a potty pad there. The dog poops in the living room, they put a potty pad there. The dog poops by the front door, they put a potty pad there. So I could literally skip from potty pad to potty pad in different homes that I visit, which is the wrong way to develop potty areas, right? The big key for potty training is you want it to be the same area, the same surface, in the same and develop enough scent on that area so that the dog starts developing the habit and desire to go there. So I would pick 1, maybe 2 areas where it's acceptable for your dog to go potty and stick to it, right? And make sure anytime your dog has to go potty, we take them there. So step number 2 is making sure our dog's potty trained. Number 3, make sure our dogs sleep all the way through the night. Right. So I can't explain to you how many calls I get that go, my dog constantly wakes me up at 2 a.m. My dog constantly wakes me up at 4 a.m. And that's usually simply because the first 2 or the meal times are off. So we can adjust meals, adjust water intake a little bit towards the end of the day so that our dogs learn to sleep the full 8 hours in the evening. Okay. Number 4, we want to make sure our dogs are okay being alone. Right. So if we make sure that our dogs are okay being alone throughout the day, let's say I'm working, my dog can be in his area for, an hour, and then we take them out to go potty and play with them. That's very, very good, because if our dogs are good with being alone occasionally, then that opens up a lot of doors for confidence building, for teaching them to chew on bones and play with other toys, and then most importantly, develop their confidence and independence. Right. And then the very last thing is this. When our dogs have freedom in the house, we need to be very, very clear with our dogs. Idle time inside the house tends to create bad behaviors, right? So when our dogs are free inside the house, we want to make sure that we're teaching our dogs something. We want to make sure we're teaching them to play. We're teaching them obedience. We're teaching them manners. We're teaching them bite inhibition, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we're teaching them a number of different things that are going to be helpful for when they are adults, right? The biggest mistake people make, again, we said too much freedom means the dog is spending too much unattended freedom inside the house, doing a lot of bad things, where then later we want to punish them or reprimand them for, right? So always make sure, as a dog owner, the key to successful training, when you do give the dog freedom, make sure you give him supervision and make sure you give him engagement and learning. Right? If you don't do that, then we're going to end up yelling at our dogs more than praising our dogs. Okay. So anyways, those are my 5 top tips of what we should develop in the first week. And I'm telling you guys, it's the first week. If you guys have not developed this in the first week of owning a puppy, call a dog trainer ASAP, because you need to get these things under control, because they do get worse over time. Okay.
100%.
Yeah. So a couple of the things that overlap with these top 5 tips that I have for puppies. We talked about den training, right? So den training could be crate training, could be X-pen training, whatever it is we want to teach our dogs to be okay being isolated from us, right? Which takes a little bit of time, right? Potty training, again, making sure that our dog's potty training is under control. Bite inhibition, which we mentioned earlier. Bite inhibition, for those of you guys who don't know, it is our dog's awareness of how strong their mouths are ultimately, right? So goodbye. So a lot of people call me, like I got a call today, right? It said, hey, I have a 10-week-old puppy who's really aggressive. And I go, oh, tell me a little bit about it. And he goes, yeah, he's just always biting me and he's always biting my family and he's just really aggressive. And I said, now, what do you mean by aggressive? Like, is he growling? Is he like snarling at you? He goes, no, he just comes up and bites my shoelaces, bites my pant legs, bites my hands. And I have to tell him, I said, oh, that's just having a puppy. That's just what puppies do, you know? And so bite inhibition is ultimately how humans teach dogs, and dogs teach dogs also, but we're teaching puppies the strength of their own jaw. And if we don't teach that at a really, really young age, then we run the risk of when the dog is older, they use their mouth disproportionately, which means, in situations they just wanted to nibble, they actually draw blood on accident, right? Or in situations where they just wanted to grab your shirt, they end up puncturing holes through your shirt, right? So bite inhibition is super duper important. I would say a majority of bites that happen in adolescent dogs are usually from dogs who have horrible bite inhibition, right? Now, next thing we'll talk about is, something that supplements bite inhibition is chew training, right? So we need to make sure we teach dogs what they should be chewing on versus our hands, versus our shoes, versus our couch, our pillow, etc. So this would be things like dental chews. This would be things like crinkle toys. This would be things like ropes that they can sink their teeth into. One of the very old school techniques that people would do, they would get a little hand towel, they'd soak it in some chicken broth and they freeze it. And this would be great for dogs to chew on, had good flavor, but most importantly, they'd be able to sink their teeth into it. But the most important thing about chew training is teaching our dogs to obsess over items that we want them to love when they're older, right? So this way they have an outlet for stress. They have an outlet for stimulation, brain stimulation. They have an outlet for, burning off some mental energy, right? So that's chew training. And then most important, and then our last one is going to be exercise. Okay. So many times I get people who ask, what's the right amount of exercise I should do with my dog? From my experience, what I've noticed raising a bunch of puppies don't have a lot of stamina, right? Which means they get tired pretty quickly. I would say the average puppy has about 30 minutes to 40 minutes of active learning and engagement, right? Doesn't mean that they fall asleep right at 40 minutes. It just means you'll start seeing that our dogs don't need 1 to 2 hours of exercise at any given time. They just need 30 to 40 minutes of active engagement, right? And so some mistakes that I see is people want to take their puppies for walks. Walks are exercise for fully vaccinated and confident dogs, right? So save that for a little bit later in the dog's puppyhood, okay? But the best types of exercise would be actually like playing, toys, throwing the ball, squeakies. Training is a good form of exercise as well. It's a mental and a physical situation. But the idea is we want to master exercise with our dogs. Now, exercise is going to differ a little bit from dog to dog. Some dogs are more prone to learning certain skills over others, but the idea is we want exercise to be part of our routine, right? So there's one thing I'll finish this section off with, which is what I call a puppy cycle, okay? A puppy cycle is your dog waking up, going potty, your dog is fed something, be it a meal or be it training, right? After the dog eats something, then the dog's probably going to have to go potty again. After the dog goes potty that second time, then we give the dog freedom. Then we give the dog playtime. We give the dog the opportunity to exercise. Now, after those 30 to 40 minutes of exercise, our puppies will take a nap. Naturally, if we calm them down or if we confine them, our dogs will take a nap, right? So this is one puppy cycle. Now, always what I want to motivate my people to do is to figure out to repeat this puppy cycle as many times as necessary for their puppies as they throughout the day, right? So I would say on average, there's 5 to 6 puppy cycles per day that happen before we go back to bed, right? So anyways, so that's my idea of routine building: den training, potty training, bite inhibition, chew training, exercises, and all of this fall into a puppy cycle. If we do multiple puppy cycles per day, now we have our daily routine for our dogs.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of thing plays perfectly into relationship to learning stuff, which I think is, I'm going to kind of explain what it is first and then get into some points about it, because it's one of those things that we talked about this to an extent in our socialization deeper look episode. And it was a lot of people with puppies, if they have certain expectations to them, to one side or the other, they're either too lenient or expect too much out of them straight off the bat. In either one of those instances, they don't understand why it's important to not necessarily stick super firm to one particular like point of what they want versus just keeping the dog at such a young age, their overall attitude and ideas toward training and being attentive and listening to you as an owner, high. And here's a clearer example of what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, I like to tell people this: when you're working with the puppy for the first few actual food lessons of obedience, straight up obedience. Now the routine building stuff is already underway. So we're talking direct, like, here's some food, sit good, sit good. Now you'll notice in the first lesson or two, the puppy loves treats or even their kibble. A lot of puppies just eat straight their kibble.
Mm-hmm.
They're excited for it, which is great. Tail wagging, having fun. But like 3, 4, 5 lessons in, they're even more excited because
Yeah.
now they've had a chance to develop the love for it. And they're like, oh, this game is fun. So you're telling me I just do this easy thing and I get food. And on top of that, you're like happy about it. And it's like, good boy.
Mm-hmm.
And, all this stuff starts to steamroll. So I always try to make it very clear to owners: when you're doing food work with your puppy, yes, of course, you're teaching the commands themselves and you're working on just markers and timing and all the core foundational stuff of training, 100%. But you're also building your dog's character. You're teaching a dog to
Right.
want to focus, to want to pay attention to you, to want to work hard for you. Now, uh, where people get stuck, this is what I started with, was, let's say you do 3, 4 food lessons, dog's looking good with like food sits and getting there with food downs,
Mm-hmm.
but they keep breaking after like 2 seconds. And you're like, oh, if this puppy would wait for freaking 5 seconds, I would just release you and reward you.
Mm-hmm.
People can get stuck, which is not the right thing to do, especially when you're dealing with a dog so young. They'll get stuck on that one goal. Like, no, I want the 5 second down. So they'll do something like lure the dog into a food sit, food down. All that looks great. 1, 2, and on second number 3, the dog gets up. So they'll jam a leash on and like start leash pressure the dog to the ground
Mm-hmm.
just to get
Mm-hmm.
to the 5 second mark. And it,
Right.
I guess technically you got it, but you really shot yourself in the foot, because now the puppy's going to be like, whoa, that wasn't fun. And
Leash is no bueno.
right, exactly. And so you really have to pay attention to make sure that when you're building a dog at such a young age, their relationship to learning, you're starting from scratch. So making sure that you understand how to develop motivation, when to turn it up if the dog's having fun, to keep it challenging so the dog stays engaged, but not crushing the dog, because that's a
Right.
very easy thing to do when you have a puppy. Um,
Right.
Building focus is kind of along that same thing. A lot of it is just, that's a lot of when like very mild distraction stuff comes into play. Can my dog stay attentive to me? And again, food work, like obedience, simple stuff is a really great way to do that. Start building your front to heels, your sits and downs, and some very basic like place and stuff with food. The crate
Mm-hmm.
command is a huge one with food, especially if you're going to be feeding your dog in the crate, which lends itself to routine building. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think an interesting one too is again, this ties a lot into socializing, but you have to be a little bit fluid with it. Don't Dog training isn't always linear. Like if I
Mm-hmm.
go out after we're done here and do another lesson with one of my training dogs, and they do a little worse this time than they did like a couple hours ago, you can't kind of take that to heart.
No.
Dogs, there are many reasons why they fluctuate throughout the day, and this one's young too, by the way. He's 5 months old. He's not a super young dog, but he's a puppy, and
Mm-hmm.
he has his little puppy cycles too. Maybe less so as he gets that little bit older, but
Mm-hmm.
you'll notice he's kind of more attentive in the afternoon. He's a little more distracted in the evening. It's other stuff going on too. Maybe the other dogs are a little more excitable, like right around sundown. And there's so many factors to consider. But with all that, you just have to meet the dog where they are in that moment, and just know that with puppies, that's turned up to 11. So If he so if he's distracted at the moment or just can't do it for whatever reason, like definitely challenge him enough that it's challenging but doable. I want the dog to win a lot because I want them to understand training is something that is fun. I do really
Yes.
good at it. That goes into confidence building too. It's something that I want to do more. In fact, I like this guy. In fact, I like listening to this guy. And that sets you up
Or
for,
girl, or
or
girl.
girl, sure. So it just it sets you up in such a great way in the future of like that's what we mean when we see a lot of people with older dogs. You're like, you live with the dog, they kind of know you and love you and stuff like that, but they don't quite look to you for advice, direction, coaching, guidance. And
Right.
teaching a dog to learn from you, teaching the dog to have that relationship with you of like, hey, listen, I love you, I'm dad or mom, but I'm also the person you come to when you're stuck.
Right.
That changes so much when it comes to puppy raising, and that's one thing that I really want to make sure that people listen to this and take that from this.
Right. No, I can't agree more. I think relationship to learning stuff is literally the foundation of your relationship with your dog.
Right.
Right. So many people, they waste the first 4 to 6 months of their puppy's childhood and they don't develop that rapport. Right. It's like, imagine not playing with your, well, here's the thing. There's a lot of people who play with their puppies, but getting the dog to want to work and please you is ultimately the shift in the relationship, right? Do you want to be the dog's playmate or do you want to be the dog's instructor that he likes to please, right? It really depends on what your expectation of your overall relationship is, right? So yeah, that's interesting, man. Interesting. So yeah, so then that brings us to our next section, which is confidence building, right? This is a huge part of puppy raising, and we talk about confidence building because it's really easy to not develop confidence. As Mariano mentioned, he said, play is going to help in confidence building. He mentioned that obedience is going to help in confidence building. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're priming our dog's brains to be able to take direction from us to help give them guidance when socializing the dog in certain situations. Right. So whether we're socializing dogs with humans, whether we're socializing dogs with dogs, or we're socializing them with environments, this is where our dogs at a young puppy stage really look up to us for some type of context. Like, should I feel bad? Should I feel scared? Should I feel happy? What is it that we should do? Now, if we don't have that rapport from relationship building, doing obedience work, routine development, if we don't have, that ability to guide our dogs, then unfortunately the socialization process actually becomes pretty difficult. Right. I think one of the most common misconceptions people think about socialization, they think that socialization has to do with just unhindered play or interaction.
Mhm.
Right. What they'll do is they'll let their puppy just jump and wiggle all over somebody and give them kisses, which is great, which is cool. Or they'll let the dogs go and just jump all over other dogs and run around and act crazy for 20, 30 minutes. But unfortunately, what happens is your dogs sometimes get conditioned to always live at a level 10 or 11, right? And so what happens is sometimes socialization turns into like a party, right? Where we can sometimes condition our dogs on one side of the spectrum. We can condition them that anytime you see something you want to interact with, it's party time, right? And on the opposite side of that spectrum, for dogs who are a little bit more sensitive, we can teach them that anytime that there's someone that you like or don't like, you have to deal with them anyways, right? So in some situations that's good, in some situations that's bad. It all depends on how the dog interprets that social interaction, which we've talked about before in our socialization episode. So this kind of brings me up to advocating for our dogs, right? It's really important for us to not only know our environment, but to be able to read the environment in a way where we can make better judgment calls, but also how is our dog interpreting the environment? Is our dog interpreting the environment where he's scared? Is he interested? Is he intrigued? Is he stimulated? What is it that my dog is doing in that particular situation? And our job as the parents is to advocate for the dog. Is this going to be a good choice for my baby? Is this going to leave a good imprint on my dog? Right. And I would say, there's a lot of things that we let our puppies do that we wouldn't really let our human children do. I would say people are more protective of their human children than they are of dog children. And, in some situations, this is why we see some dogs who suffer from bad trauma, or they have bad behavioral issues later down the line because, we didn't give them the same morals, values, and boundaries that we would give a human child, right? And don't get me wrong, two different species. However, in the human world I live in out here in LA, dogs are family, dogs are children. And unfortunately, it's, the interpretations of the picking and choosing of the rules is a little off, I would say.
Yeah, and when we talk about advocating for the dog, there's the other side of that too, which is when you consider how a dog feels about another person, a dog, or an environment, your reaction to these things or your reaction to the dog's reaction to these things matters too. Your dog is always watching. Dogs are master observers. So,
Mm-hmm.
an example of what I mean is I would walk a dog. I did a lesson with someone who had a really nervous, fearful dog. We were walking around a park. Um, Somebody's off leash dogs again, come right up to us. Owner's like, "Oh, it's okay, they're friendly," and I'm like, "Oh shit," and I can see the owner is getting real nervous, like, "Oh no, this is where he like freaks out and blah blah blah." So I'm like, "Okay, fine." So I put him in sit. This dog is, trained. I was like, "No, you sit,
Mm-hmm.
you don't move," and I shooed the other dogs away.
Uh-huh.
I didn't let him move, but I took care of it. That was me
Right.
advocating for the dog. I know you're stressed out. I know that you don't
Mm-hmm.
feel good because these other dogs are in the way. And so he felt a certain way about the dogs, but me shooing them away, him being aware of this,
Mm-hmm.
can really alter the way the dog sees you, and therefore the dog sees the environment when they are with you. I tell people all the time that what a dog knows and how a dog feels are so hugely impacted by who they're with. If a
Right.
dog is trustworthy of you, you can get a lot out of them from a handler's perspective and still get them to kind of believe you that you can keep them safe. And just to
Right.
touch on a final point of what you talked about in the very beginning, which was why giving direction correlates with confidence building. It's
Mm-hmm.
because teaching a dog to not only accept guidance but to seek out guidance directly is confidence building, because it's when a dog is stuck and they don't know what to do that they shrink, right? Or they
Yeah.
crack. And when a dog is comfortable with asking for guidance and they know how to do that,
Yeah.
then they don't have to shrink. They're just like, "Hey, help me out." And you go, "Okay, boom." And you pick it up and then there you go. So it's
Yeah.
so important that you have this mutual understanding with your dog, and that's where obedience comes into play. That's where the routine stuff really helps with the obedience and everything else, but also advocating for your dog. Let them know that you'll be there even when these crazy things happen, so that when they do, your dog doesn't feel the need to kick into autopilot. They're like, "All right, mom, dad, you got it. I'm just going to sit back and watch."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Yeah, one of my mentors, Bobby Durafshar, he used to always give this example. He used to say, if you're sitting in class and the teacher calls on the class for an answer to a quiz or for whatever the homework was, well, if you didn't do your homework and you don't know the answers, what do? He goes, you kind of slouch down, you pretend to be rummaging through your backpack like you're busy. You look down at your notebook and you start writing on it so that hopefully she doesn't call on you. In essence, you act timid, you act insecure, right? Because you don't know the answers to the questions that are about to be presented to you. And he goes, however, if you did do your homework and you do know the answers, what do? You light up, you stand up tall, you raise your hand as high as you possibly fucking can, and you sit to ask the teacher, pick me, I know the answers, right? And ultimately, this is the metaphor for when dogs are educated and when dogs are trained and when we do have that rapport, our dogs will light up with confidence versus, slouch and shrivel down in insecurity, right? So the key to making sure that the dogs know the right answers to situation, even if they don't know the right answers, at least make sure that we have the rapport where they can come and ask us for those answers. That's probably the most important part of confidence building and puppy raising, right?
100%. Because dogs don't know
Yeah,
the answers. It's our job to teach them.
100%. Yep, I completely agree. So just to kind of recap what we've gone over today, we've gone over routine building, which is den training, potty training, bite inhibition, chew training, and exercise. Guys, if you guys are having struggles, if you guys are watching this and have or listening to this and have a puppy, or someone who has had a puppy for several weeks or months, and they have not been able to master these things, please recommend them to reach out to dog trainers. Anyone who has listened to our podcast reach out to me or Mariano, depending on where you guys are. Go ahead and write us on Instagram. Our Instagrams are, mine is at CANISBEHAVIOR. His is at UNTAMEDDOGCO, Untamed.dog.co. Go ahead and reach out to us, and we're happy to give you guys some advice and guide you guys through some of the issues you guys might be struggling with. Because, again, as dog trainers, our passion is to make sure these puppies start off on the right foot. Because you know what, we can't train every single dog there is out there, even though we'd love to, or we wish that we could multiply ourselves so that we have the opportunity and the privilege to work with all these puppies. But for the most part, we want to just make sure that these dogs are getting off on the right foot. All right. So I want to thank everybody for listening to this podcast. My name is Brent, and that guy over there is Mariano. This is episode 17, the current puppy boom. A couple of tips that we had for puppy raising during the current puppy boom. We already went over our Instagram handles, but just one more time, go ahead and follow us at CANISBEHAVIOR. Or Mariano, you can find him at UNTAMEDDOGCO. That's UNTAMEDDOGCO. You can also find us on all major podcast platforms and right here on YouTube. Please go ahead and like us on YouTube and go and leave a comment down below. Please subscribe to our podcast as well, so you guys can be updated to when we have a new episode coming up. And again, we want to thank you guys so much for this exponential growth in our podcast. Those of you who are sharing this podcast with your family and friends, we really, really appreciate you guys. Our whole goal is to get as much knowledge out there to as many people as we possibly can. So on behalf of myself and Mariano, we'll see you guys in episode 18. You guys have a great rest of your week. We'll see you then. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We'll see you next time.